Chinese President Xi Jinping says China is willing to restart exchanges with the European Union on all levels. He spoke with French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The two European leaders are in Beijing to rebuild ties and to push for peace in Ukraine. Mr. Macron is hoping to persuade Mr. Xi to help end the war in Ukraine.
Et je sais pouvoir compter sur vous, au titre d'ailleurs des deux principes que je viens d'évoquer, pour ramener la Russie à la raison et tout le monde à la table des négociations. Et nous y reviendrons dans le détail, mais nous avons besoin de retrouver une paix durable, c'est-à-dire une paix qui respecte les frontières internationalement reconnues et qui évite toute forme d'escalade. Et je crois que c'est aussi une question importante pour la Chine autant qu'elle l'est pour la France et pour l'Europe.
And Olivia Xiong joins us live from Beijing. Olivia, what was President Xi Jinping's reaction? What has it been so far to Mr. Macron's appeal for peace in Ukraine?
Well, as we heard there, Mr. Macron saying that he was counting on his Chinese counterpart to bring Russia to its senses. And we know that even prior to this visit, Mr. Macron had placed the Ukraine war very high on his agenda, keen for China to use its influence over Russia to rein in Moscow. But we saw that Mr. Xi, in his opening remarks of that meeting, did not mention Ukraine. Also, he had this to say when both leaders met the media.
关于乌克兰危机，中方坚持劝和促谈、政治解决。中方愿同法方一道，呼吁国际社会保持理性克制，避免采取使危机进一步恶化甚至失控的行动。
Now, we know that China has adopted what is called a neutral position in this Ukraine war, and it's noteworthy in that Mr. Xi's comments to the media, he adopted very vague language, not mentioning Russia or Ukraine or other countries, even as he said that there was a need to ensure civilians would be protected and that nuclear weapons are not used. Also stopping short of condemning Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, as has been China's position in this past year. It's a contrast to Mr. Macron's statement that followed, in which he specifically said, for example, that Russia was violating humanitarian law in Ukraine. Also, it was telling that the French leader did say that while he agrees with a number of the principles that he had discussed with the Chinese side, that he hoped that in the very near future that there would be a much more demanding conversation between the two sides. And with Russia, he said, to remind Moscow of these principles, that it's a matter of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, perhaps pointing and signaling that Mr. Macron may have not solicited the kind of response or commitment that he was hoping for from the Chinese leader.
Olivia, of course, Mr. Macron is not the only European leader in Beijing right now. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen also there. How is China framing its future relations with the European Union?
Well, China has really been rolling out the red carpet for Mr. Macron in that welcome ceremony that we saw, and they just concluded those trilateral talks, including the EU chief, Ms. von der Leyen. And now we know that from the get-go, Mr. Xi, in opening remarks, has talked about with his French counterpart that with regard to the international situation, that changes and chaos have been intertwined with each other. But he said that France and China have, through joint efforts, been able to keep up a positive and steady momentum, lauding growth in trade as well as in other sectors from aerospace to agriculture. And when it comes to relations with Europe, we saw that Mr. Xi was keen to highlight the common ground that both sides had in spite of the troubled relationship that we've seen in the last few years. Ms. von der Leyen taking on a more hawkish tone, calling on European economies to de-risk their relationship with China. But Mr. Xi instead saying that China was willing to work with the EU to restart exchanges on all levels and to eliminate interference and challenges and inject new impetus to China-EU relations. Wei Su.
And thanks to Olivia Xiong reporting live to us there from Beijing.